everyone. So first I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the three people that I interviewed. The first person I interviewed is named Luke, and he's 12 years old. He is a struggling reader, really does not care to read, likes to be read aloud too, receives extra reading support in the classroom, and enjoys what he learns in social studies. He oftentimes does not feel comfortable reading textbooks. The last book he read was The Wizard of Oz, and it was and that was a chosen book. And he really also sometimes likes to read about science too. So a lot of like the National Geographic books, he likes those as well. He doesn't like to reread books. When I asked him if he ever reread a book, he said, "No, why would I do that?" And he had a very hard time understanding why anyone would possibly need to reread a book. So that was kind of funny. And he said that he thinks females are better readers because they read more. He enjoys reading magazines, short stories, and novels. Well, I wouldn't say enjoys, but prefers over other things. He likes anime movies, and he said that a lot of times he does not actually read the books for school. He just watches the movies instead because it's much easier for him to do so. So when thinking about Luke, I'm thinking about a quote that was from the Gaynor and Loop article. Did you feel overwhelmed by this task? That's how students often feel when they are presented with a list of words they don't know. So this was in reference to the technology survey to see which words the reader was familiar with. And Luke is a struggling reader. I really think can relate to this. This is what it would be like to be Luke. To sit down and really not understand most of the words that are on the page. So to me, I think that's significant that we have to realize how difficult it really is to be a struggling reader. All right, and so the other quote that I think from the different readings that we've had that relates and resonates with Luke is from Busher and Hinton, our textbook. It says, "In fact, textbooks often break knowledge down into formal clusters of information that do not encourage readers' interest, content acquisition, and meaningful retention." So I think that it's clear that he's not comfortable with reading textbooks. Well, he's not comfortable reading textbooks because it's challenging for him. The vocabulary is too hard, and there's nothing motivating him to read. Thankfully, he still likes science and social studies because he likes some of the content, but the textbooks themselves are way too hard for him to comprehend. Another quote that I thought that resonated for Luke was, "Do adolescents read? Recent studies have suggested that few adolescents choose to read on their own." So I think that that's a significant quote. He talks about how he does not like to read, very rarely reads at home, and he only reads at school when he's forced to. And I think that the statistics in the Pitcher article are kind of alarming as to how many kids are not reading. Because I really think that many more, I think as a teacher, I thought many more kids actually read books. So another quote, and this quote, I know Luke, he's very involved in sports. So I found kind of a sports analogy in the Busher and Hinton textbook that I thought Luke could relate to. So if he was my student, I might say something like this to him. "A coach would never say to a basketball player, 'You know how to shoot a basket, so you don't need to practice anymore.' Instead, both the coach and the player know that practice improves performance." So I think that's pretty significant right there to show that to become a better reader, you have to practice reading. If you struggle reading, practice and you'll be better. And I think a lot of kids can relate to sports, so I think that that's definitely something to think about. Okay, so my next person, let me just flip over here real quick, is Haley. So she's kind of, I would say, your everyday average reader. I wouldn't say she's above grade level or below grade level from what I know about her. She's 13. She also thinks that females are better readers because they can sit down and concentrate better, which I also thought was interesting, but that makes sense because a lot of younger boys have a lot of hyperactivity, so I guess I understand where that comes from. I saw that she really, as a child, enjoyed having her parents read to her, so I thought that was pretty sweet. I remember my parents used to read to me before I went to bed every night. And she considers herself a good reader because she is easily able to comprehend what she has read, but she takes a little bit longer to read it, and sometimes she may have to read it more than once. And she thinks good readers don't skim books, they really read them. So I thought that was kind of cute. And she also points out that sometimes you're not going to get everything you read the first time, and you might have to read it again. Which I also thought for a 13-year-old, that was a really good point to make. She talks about how she doesn't like teachers reading aloud to her sometimes. Sorry, that was actually that was actually my other girl. So Haley does like to have the teacher read aloud to her because she likes to visualize the story in her head, and so it's easier for her to visualize the story in her head if the teacher is reading. So she does enjoy that. So some quotes that I thought resonated with Haley is let me see here. Data also shows that assigned reading could also turn them off because it is too hard and boring. It doesn't seem that she really cares for assigned reading sometimes from what she said to me. So this was from the Pitcher article, and so I could see for her that maybe it wasn't too hard, but maybe it was too easy, and that kind of turned her off. And I think she probably doesn't talk about really liking textbooks too much, so maybe some of those might be boring to her as well. So that's definitely something to consider. It's interesting to me that none of the three people that I interviewed talked anything about graphic novels, but I think that graphic novels can be something that can be very helpful for students. For instance, a quote from the Pagliaro article suggests that graphic novels provide struggling readers with a visual but equally rigorous reading experience. So I think that for struggling readers like Luke, and maybe even Haley at some points in time, graphic novels might be something that they would be interested in. So that's something definitely that we need to think about. That it's a genre that students really, really are exposed to, and we need to be aware of that. Okay, so my third person is Julia. Julia, from what I can gather, is a star pupil. She's also 13, and interestingly enough, she's best friends with Haley. So she talks about mostly how much she loves reading. She says that she only owns about 20 books, but that she reads a lot. Interestingly enough, it doesn't seem like she reads a lot during the summer. She reads mostly during the school year, but I think that would be a pretty common trend that you would see across most youngsters. She couldn't remember how she learned how to read. She also thought that females read better. She thinks that good readers need to concentrate. They need to sit and focus, and she doesn't check her phone while she's reading, which I think is wonderful. But I'm definitely a culprit of doing that myself. She doesn't like the teacher to read to her because she thinks the teacher reads too slow. She likes to read fast because reading is easy to her and she easily comprehends things. So I would say she's reading things that are way above her grade level. So she says she only reads a couple books during the summer. She likes Nicola Yoon and J.K. Rowling, so she likes the adventure fantasy type books, which makes sense because she actually says that she likes to get lost inside of a book. And that's actually one of the quotes, that's actually a quote from the Busher and Hinton text where they talk about how mystery and fantasy books and books with humor, students like those because they can get lost within the text itself. And so that kind of resonated with me, and I think that quote shows true with Haley. I'm sorry, Julia. I'm getting all these names messed up. I apologize. So just a few other quotes that I think that kind of resonate to this whole project. We really, there's a big gap between what teachers actually read and what we think defines literacy. And this is from the Swan article, and I think that really holds true. We define literacy in one way, yet we may read different forms of new literacies and read graphic novels and all these other things that don't necessarily fit that definition of what we had previously defined literacy as. And I think also as teachers, it goes to show we have, one struggling reader here. We were talking about Luke. And we really need to remember this quote as teachers. And this is from the textbook from Busher and Hinton. Young adult literature should be appreciated and enjoyed in itself. And young adults should have access to books written especially for them. So my guess would be part of the reason Luke is a struggling reader is because he hasn't found books that specifically interest him yet. So I think that he needs to be provided with more adolescent literature because he's such a low reader. I think that maybe sometimes he's given text that could be too juvenile for him. Like I said, I'm not his teacher, but I would say that that's definitely a possibility. I know that in my classroom, I really, really struggle to find texts that are mature enough for my struggling readers who, let's say, read at a kindergarten or first grade level but are in 6th grade. So it's definitely something that we have to consider as teachers, and there definitely needs to be more mature books written at a lower Lexile level to accommodate for our struggling readers so they aren't discouraged. And then my other quote that just again talks about motivation, which is something that we've talked about throughout this course, day after day, block after block, is, and this is from the Pitcher article. In each case, school practices act as disincentives because they fail to take into account what motivates adolescents to read. We need to be aware and we need to know our students. If we don't truly know our students by having them fill out things like these surveys or interviewing them and asking survey questions, we really aren't going to know who they are as readers. We have to take the time to know our students so we can figure out what is going to motivate them to want to read. And then last but not least, this is just something important to keep in mind throughout it all, and I was constantly thinking about this throughout this course, is another quote from Busher and Hinton. Young adult literature is not a stepping stone to better literature. It is a genre in its own, and we need to remember that. Adolescent literature does not mean less. It should be equal to children's literature and to adult literature. Thanks, everyone.